Welcome to our newest ShiftED podcast. Today I had the great pleasure of talking with Eva DeGOSZTONYI and Catherine KORAH from the Center of Excellence. And we really spent our time together kind of talking about the brain science and early childhood development. It's really fascinating how the brain works and what influences the brain in its learning journey. So I hope you enjoy this conversation that we had. Thanks for coming and talking with us today, Eva and Catherine from the Center of Excellence. Could you guys maybe tell us a little bit about what the Center of Excellence is? What's its objectives, and when did it kind of start? I know it came out of the Riverside School Board, but could you guys fill in a bit of those blanks?
Sure, Chris. Happy to do that. So the Center of Excellence, although it's based in Riverside School Board, is a service to the 10 English school boards of Quebec. It was established in the early 2000s, I believe 2001, when it was formally established, just after the school boards had switched to linguistic boards, and all of a sudden it became apparent that we needed Anglophones to be able to communicate with the Anglophone school boards, and so they gave a certain amount of money to the English directors of the school boards and said, organize yourselves. And so they organize themselves in centers of excellence. There are a number of them. But our center focuses on children with severe behavior disorders, and we happen to have that expertise at Riverside School Board at that time. And so that is our role. And the beauty of it was that because it was in the early 2000s, we had a lot more knowledge in our hands. And myself as a school psychologist, I was the coordinator for many, many years on my own, realized that we really needed to start looking at children differently because the bottom line is, for me, a child who has a behavior problem is a child who's communicating to us that something is not working for them. And luckily now we have the neuroscience that really helps us to realize that there's a whole lot going on in terms of a child's development. And when things don't go right in the child's development, that's when we see the behavior problems. And so we're using a combination of the neuroscience, of a developmental approach that was put together, but based on the understandings that we have of child development. And also now our understanding of children who live things, we call it trauma often, that cause a lot of disruption in their development. And all of this leads to manifesting itself through behavior problems. So when we're looking at how do we help the school boards work with children who manifest behavior problems, we're really working at helping them to understand why these problems are there, and then what we can do from a very holistic developmental perspective, intervene with them to help these children grow and develop as they should.
Great. And do you focus on one child, or do you support the system to support the child?
Our job is to support the systems that support the child. So our mandate is to build the capacity of the English school boards of Quebec. So our primary work is with the professionals, with the consultants at the school boards, and develop their capacity. And what we have done is actually, the pandemic has helped us very much to enhance a website that we've developed. Actually, CEBM.ca brings you to this wonderful website that Catherine has been instrumental in pulling together for us. And that is where we are sharing our knowledge, our background, our information, so that people then can take that information, make it their own, and implement it in their schools.
Right. Because I imagine when you're looking at students and their development, that they're all kind of developing at their own rate, their own progression they're going through.
Yes. Of course, we know that there are some general trends that kind of go with the age of the child, but there are many factors that can affect how a child is going to develop, what's going to happen. And we now know that when the child is not developing as they should, there's usually something parallel that's going on inside of the brain, and that then causes problems because now they're out of sync with the children, with the expectations for the children of their age, and with the expectation of the behaviors. They respond to the pressures and expectations differently, and so there are many factors that affect what something will look like. A behavior problem will come out because things are not going as they should in the optimal development of a child.
Great. And Eva, can you talk a little bit about, I know that in our system, we're often not versed very much in early childhood development, and particularly in neuroscience and how kids grow up. What have been some of the biggest challenges for you in making sure this information is out there and understood? What are some of your the ways that you go about informing our educational population about brain science?
Well, as I say right now, if you listen to any of the recordings that are found on our website, they always include a neuroscientific component, because we actually probably, I would say, started really, we could study the brain earlier, but in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, there was a huge explosion in the ability of looking at a functioning human brain. For me, one of the crucial ones was to realize that even with the most well-developed of our adolescents, that their brain doesn't fully develop until they're 25. So already, as I often say in joking to my elementary schools, you don't have a student in your school that has more than half a brain. Why are we treating them like adults?
Right.
Let alone understanding how all the way down to newborns. And again, one of the key sort of studies, and again, it's just a small little study. Neither Catherine nor I mean, there's myself and Catherine right now. We both work part-time. We don't have a huge research team behind us, but we are sensitive to and aware of and try to stay on top of some key aspects of neuroscientific research. But in 2010, Maryse Lassonde at Saint Justine Hospital wanted to look at what happened in a newborn baby's brain at day one, right at the day after they're born. And she was looking at language development, but what was fascinating to find was that the baby's brain worked more efficiently when the mother spoke to the baby than when another female spoke to the baby. So two big things came from that is, first of all, the human brain is wired to receive language, but it operates most effectively and efficiently in attachment. And so again, one of the things that we are constantly talking about is if we want the brain to develop optimally, it has to be done in the context of a safe and secure attachment. And so this is very much the message we try to give, that the brain takes a long time to develop. So not before 25, even if all goes well. And there are many parts of the brain that are developing, and they all have to kind of work together in the early school years. So the K4, K5 years are a time when there's still a lot of development going on with different parts of the brain, and they are not yet acting together. And that is why when we look at our K4s and our K5s, we have to treat them and think of them very differently than we do the children that are 7 to and getting older than 7. But even our 7-year-olds, it's only starting to happen. So we have to be very careful not to think that they are little adults, but to truly understand how the brain is working its way to coming together.
Fascinating. It's Catherine, maybe I'm going to ask you this question. What was the research or the aha research that changed it all for you, that changed your mindset on how kids develop? Could you pinpoint like maybe not specific, but something that inspired you kind of to be like, wow, this is massive?
I don't have any one particular. I have to say most of them are actually quite mind-blowing when you start seeing the data and realize that not only does the brain take a long time to develop, and that there needs to be ideal conditions. I think the other piece too that spoke to me really strongly is the whole sensitivity piece, and that even if the conditions are ideal, that for certain children who are very sensitive, that experience emotions very intensely, don't develop as quickly because their attachment is, the vulnerability to attach is more difficult for them. And so they don't take the same risks, and it takes longer. In my private practice, above and beyond working for the Center of Excellence, I also work with parents in a private practice. And I have a lot of clientele that come to me with gifted children or children on the spectrum, and how it takes more time. And to be patient for that. And so that definitely, the research is there. It's clear, when you see when the brain lights up in a certain way, it's not that we're supposing or having hypothesis. We see it, in front of our eyes. And so it really makes it much more what's the word, official, I guess.
Right, right. No, it's interesting. What about if we kind of focus in maybe on like our 4 to 7 year olds, where I know that is a big stage in a person's life as they grow up and develop. Um, what are is it that all kids in that age range go through similar developmental stages? I mean, they might through it at different times, but
Mm-hmm.
is every child's progression the same?
It's a really good question, Chris, and I would actually break that down, because 4 to 7 is actually not a typical age gap that I would put together.
Okay.
Typically, the 4 and 5 year olds are kind of a species of their own, because
Okay.
it's only under the best conditions for a child who's not too sensitive, with ideal conditions, that they barely start at 5 to start developing some of that potential from the prefrontal cortex, and to be able to have some of the fruit slowly here and there of the maturity. And so a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old are completely different species. I recall when my daughter, who's now 12, even past her birthday, her 5-year-old birthday, there was a small shift there that happened from 4 to 5. But to go back to your question, though, about the similar patterns, I cannot say that there is a similar pattern. Yes, all the potential is there for all children, but the rhythm at which it will unfold, and whether there will be some certain parts that may slow down, and the development's not equal on all fronts either. I see some children who develop quite quickly on the kind of like the gross motor or the fine motor, and then others more in terms of the cognitive, and some with the emotional. It's not all equal. And so it really is kind of unique. It's almost like as if we could compare children to snowflakes and say how they're all kind of unique to themselves.
Right. Oh, it's fascinating. It's
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. And what environmental effects influence this progression the most? If you had to choose a couple of environmental factors and the progression, I mean, I'm sure there's a plethora. What are some of the
there is and there
dominant
isn't, Chris. Yeah, there is and there isn't, because what is the most critical factor in human development is a safe and caring attachment with an adult who's able to be responsible and caring with a child. And there's two parts to it as well. I mean, children need to feel that they're clearly loved by the person who's caring for them, but they also have to feel that this person is able to make the decisions that need to be made, which are sometimes not always that appreciated by the child in the moment, but appreciated certainly in the long run. When attachments are disrupted, this is when development is disrupted, and this is when emotions are affected, and this is when behaviors come out. So one of the most critical things that we as a society need to think about is, how do we create a village of attachments? Because it does not need to be just the mother or the father. It can be a village of people, including a wonderful daycare, including a wonderful school, but where all of the adults are seen as part of this village that is caring for the children, but where they are also able to respond to the needs of the child, which is not easy to do when you have a classroom of 18, 20, 25 young children, all developing at different stages, and yet who need to go through a curriculum that is primarily designed for one kind of development in mind.
Right. Oh,
if I may add, I think another piece after attachment is the space to play, the space to be at rest, and how, and that's why I believe that the K4 program and K5 has turned towards play as being so central, because if the child can allow for themselves to play out what they need to play out, both on an emotional level, but on a developmental level as well, this too makes a huge difference in terms of growth.
Right. Yeah, and we often hear about play for our youngest learners, so our preschool and daycare environments, where play, why is it so important? Can you guys flush that out a little bit more? Because you hear often that, and we're shifting that way, but I think oftentimes teachers have less of an understanding of what play really means. Like, what does that mean, play?
So I'll take the cognitive part, and then I'll let Catherine talk about the emotional part, because both of those aspects are essential for healthy human development. Just from the brain perspective, and especially in our very youngest, but as all for all of us as we get older, but our children in elementary and in high school, we have two major hemispheres of our brain. We have our left hemisphere that is very oriented towards logical and doing things in sort of a certain kind of an order, one step after another, focused on a lot of details, which again, of course, if you want to problem solve, you need to remember what the details are so you know what the problem is all about. But then we have the right hemisphere of our brain, which basically pulls this information together in a much more holistic way. Prior to, again, the early 2000s, we did not have a true understanding of how important the right hemisphere was. We thought we were very proud of our very logical left hemisphere, but what we didn't understand was that if you can't do something with the details, pull them together, see the bigger picture, see how they interrelate with each other, you are going to become a very limited problem solver in every aspect. But one of the critical things we now know about the right hemisphere is that it only grows through experiences. You cannot teach it. You can teach things to the left hemisphere, but for the right hemisphere to make sense of what the teachings are, it needs to have lots and lots of experience. And that actually must go through well to 7 years of age, where children do the hands-on figuring it out themselves, making errors in the context of play, because play is not about outcome. You don't get marked on your play. It doesn't matter whether the rice that you poured into the bowl pours over the bowl. What's important is that you, in your ability, however you are, sees what's happening to that rice and come to the conclusion that you come to. And if we start imposing too many expectations, outcomes, things that children have to be able to do, not only do we stop the right hemisphere from developing, but there's only so much time in the classroom. So when children are sitting, listening to a teacher teaching, however lovely it's done, even if it's fun, but when there's an outcome there, then the right hemisphere kind of goes to the background. And but for everything that the teacher teaches, it needs to be fully developed. There are some school systems, like in Finland, where there are no expectations for outcomes until they are well into 7 years old, and they learn to read and write just as well or better than other students. But you have to trust in the wisdom of brain development and give all children that time to play.
And Eva, to your point, and this goes for parents as well, I think, to make sense of what is considered, true play that allows for growth, and what is types of play that, yes, is playful, but doesn't really help in terms of development, and understanding that playing a video game or watching, something on a screen, or being part of a sports team competitively, all of these things can be fun, but they're not considered true play and don't make space for growth. And so understanding that for true play to unfold and happen, it needs to be coming from the child, where there isn't outcome, like you were mentioning, that it's, completely expressive from the child. And above and beyond the cognitive piece, the brain development piece with play, I mean, play has so many benefits, where it goes from, motor, gross motor development, fine motor development, in terms of problem solving, in terms of creativity and imagination. And of course, the big piece as well is emotional development, and how children can allow themselves to take risk in play, because it's not for real, and they can't get themselves into trouble where they perhaps, especially the sensitive kids, will not allow themselves to do it in real life.
Interesting. And what's the role of the teacher in this play environment? Like, because you had mentioned that true play comes from within the child. How does the teacher fit into that formula? And even the parent, for that matter, like, where do they find their role in facilitating that play for the student?
And it's such a terrific question, Chris, because I get this question all the time from parents who are trying to push and pull their children to grow up, and hoping that if they get involved in the play, that they can make this unfold faster. And actually, the truth is quite further from that. It's actually for the parents to step back and leave space for the child to be free from screens, free from any, having to please the adults, and just giving them the space, the time, and the materials to just let them be and let them go at it.
Right.
Yeah. The parent or the adult, so in the case of the school, the adult is the anchor point, the safe point, when things are not working. And as we know with young children, sometimes they do not get along, that they turn to an adult who then can mediate, intervene, manage things. And again, it's really much more about managing the environment. If you think about the adults like a gardener, a gardener does not pull on the plant to make it grow. The gardener makes sure that there's enough water, enough light, enough heat, and modifies the environment so the plant can have the optimum growth. And so the role of the adult is really to be that mediator but they don't have to intervene with the play at all. Although they can use play again. I mean, it's not that adults cannot play with children. That's a lovely way of increasing attachment as well, getting the eyes to light up, getting the children to focus on us. But when we're really looking at developmental play or emotional play, it needs to be led by the child and not interfered with by the adults, as I say, other than to give them that safe bubble in which to allow the development to happen.
Right. So the child has to have that ownership over his or her play,
Yep.
that it's theirs.
Yeah. If you're making something that you want the child to learn fun, that is not play.
Okay.
That's making learning more pleasurable.
Yes.
And the other piece too, Chris, to keep in mind, because I see it more and more nowadays with the newer generations of children, they do tend to get bored very quickly and want to be want to have some sort of things occupy them, to be entertained. And we oftentimes as parents and adults fall into that rabbit hole where we want to keep them happy and occupied, and we're actually creating that gap even wider. And so it's normal for children to fall themselves into boredom before the creativity comes out. And so we just need to wait it out.
Right. Patience, right? I mean,
yes.
I remember seeing this as teachers as well, that when we see a student struggling or needing, maybe not needing support, but struggling nonetheless, and we want to intervene and fix it or make the child feel better, that instead of maybe just letting the child work through some things that that they have to work through for that development to keep going forward.
The biggest challenge, Chris, is really the dance. There are moments when it's the right thing to step in right there, because the child is being totally overwhelmed and it's going to be too much. And then it's pulling yourself back, because as you say, if you had that little bit of patience, the child would work their way through. And you never can get it right all the time. But it's really about more and more, and I know for myself, this has been my big learning in the last 20 years, is truly respecting the growth, the natural growth pattern that is all within us as human beings, and giving it the space that we can without trying to rush it.
Great. Yes. Eva, another question that I have is, what's crucial for parents and teachers, particularly in our preschool and our Cycle 1 teachers, for them to understand about childhood development? Because they do often seem to kind of not grasp it, but they're there at the most crucial point in a child's life of this development that sticks with them. Like, what's crucial for them to understand about this development?
Well, I mean, what we have to do is undo, 100 years of behavioral psychology, which basically said that for every, behavior is only the result of what happens outside of the person. So whatever reinforcement or consequence that you get, when there was, and so really to switch that over and to believe. And I often use tomato plants as the example. You plant the seed, the first leaves that come out don't even look like a tomato plant at all. Then the leaves come out, then you've got to trust that it's going to grow flowers. The flowers come out yellow and spiky. You've got to believe that yellow spiky flowers actually turn into round red tomatoes. So again, the gardening analogy, our biggest problem is that we want to make sure our children don't get left behind. So we're pulling. The irony of it is, the more we pull, the more stressed they are. The less they grow and develop. But you have to have the faith of a gardener. And that is very hard to do. Parents are pressuring the teachers. The curriculum. Now, the one good thing we have right now is that our K4, K5 curriculum, for the most part, there's a little area in the social skills that they don't quite get yet, but most of it truly understands the need for creating the environment for growth. So that's good. Now the teachers can sit back. They don't have to worry so much, but they also we have to train our grade 1 teachers, not to put pressure on the kindergarten teachers and say, well, they don't even know how to write their names, or they don't know how to form their letters. because actually the research now shows us that a K4, K5 program that is based primarily in play, when the children get to grade 1, they are behind. When they get to grade 3, the ones who were play-based are now starting to go ahead of the ones that were academically based. And by the time they get to grade 6, the ones who had a primarily academic program in K5 actually are falling behind academically and behaviorally and emotionally.
Wow. Yeah, I've heard that research
it's
too.
all
That
there.
there's, that they're saying don't get literacy numeracy like drills going before 7 years old, because you're wasting your time, right? It doesn't prove any
well, you're not
evidence
just
that
you're not just wasting your. This is what's sad, Chris, is that you're not just wasting your time. You are actually causing damage. It would be, again, using the plant analogy, it's like cutting off too many of the little stems, trying to force that plant to grow into something it was not yet meant to grow into. So it seems to be causing damage. Again, research is always, everybody interprets it different ways, but there's enough around now. And we luckily have Finland to inspire us. Because Finland somehow has managed to stay the path of a developmental approach. Right.
It's fascinating though that we see these examples and the research is right there, yet our old ways, it's the human, it's hard for us to change.
Indeed, Chris. And the other piece too, to add on to what you're saying, that also falls into what you're saying about our old patterns, is this idea that we can teach everything to our children, and that by them learning it through teaching, that this will appear. Social skills and social emotional learning are part of that. And it doesn't mean that the adults cannot plant the seed, but for us to believe that we can teach it and that the child will then have the fruit automatically is misunderstanding how development unfolds.
Absolutely. That's a great point. That's a great point. I love your imagery as well, because it really connects to experiences that we have. And it's really cool. So as we kind of get towards the end of our time together, if we were to look at, and I threw this question at you guys, is what's an ideal elementary school? So if we're looking at past when the kids are coming in, they're 7 years old, what does your school look like in an ideal world in that cycle 1, 2, and 3? How would it work in a way that the brain reacts positively towards?
Well, Chris, we'd have to do radical reform that we're not ready to do. So Catherine and I decided we weren't going to go down that path.
Okay.
What can we do? Well, but the bottom line is that no matter what kind of a program we plan for children, if the adult and the adults that are caring for them, if they're attached to those adults, the program doesn't count quite so much anymore, because an adult to whom they are attached will keep them safe and will kind of modify the program to meet the child's needs. And this is what really effective teachers do. So let's not throw everything out with the bathwater, but for me anyway, we're looking at what we call 3 tiers. What are the kinds of things that if we had more of for all of our students would make being in elementary school a more beneficial place for them? And basically, from my perspective, it is more arts and expressive arts, not crafts, but really, painting and drawing and singing and doing these kinds of things for the pure joy of doing those things. More playtime. And we've done that in Quebec. We've done that. We now have at least, the morning recess and the afternoon recess and lunchtime. But even in my grade 1 classroom, I would always have extra, play afternoons or play hours that were not earned, that everybody got to play. And then making sure that within that prospect, that we create an environment, we as the adults, to support and to compensate for the immaturity, the natural immaturity of our children. So let's make it easy for them to get it right. So let's think about where they're getting into trouble and how we can, just like the Ministry of Transport puts a yellow line down the middle of the road so that even when it's snowing, we know where the middle of the road is. Well, let's do those kinds of things for our children to keep all of them out of as much trouble as possible. Our tier 2 and tier 3 are more specific interventions, and I'll let Catherine take those on.
And so what we mean by tier 2 is basically, some of the students who have, a harder time functioning in a regular classroom that do have some struggles. And so for those students, I guess where they have struggles as well, where we see it is in the schoolyard. And so during recess or lunch recess, for them to have more of a structured environment. I've, through my career working in different schools and school boards, have seen some schools who've done wonderful things where they've organized, had adults available who have set up certain games and certain things, whether it's older students that are overseeing it or with adults. And so this really helps for students to have predictability, to have structure, to feel safe, and so forth. And so that's huge, I think, in terms of tier 2 students, and having some supports, additional supports in the classroom. I mean, is it necessary for them to have a desk and chair and to sit there, in the same spot all day, or could they have other ways to be more effective in the classroom, more focused, whether it's for them to stand and work or to sit, on the floor and have different types of flexible seating and work options. And I know I've seen it. Many schools are already doing this and are open to that type of thing. And so that's wonderful. And for tier 3 students that are really the select few that have a hard time being, at school and in class, do we need to put the pressure onto them that for them success is to stay in the classroom? Could it be that success for them is actually to be at school, not necessarily in the classroom, and that we look to scaffold for that student, whether we have what we call a nurturing support center, that would be a space that's ran by a technician, a specialized technician, and would have different supports and resources and measures to help the student be able to focus, be able to work through their emotions and so forth. And so to be able to work as a team in the school. So it's not about one teacher being responsible for their students in one class. It's about working as a team in a school, and that we're looking at students by tiers, and that the tier 2 and tier 3, especially tier 3, are supported by the school team and not just the full-on responsibility of the one teacher. So that would be part of what we would see as an ideal school, I believe.
And what this creates then, Chris, is a school in which multiple children with multiple needs can be met, their needs can be met. And it reassures all of the children. If they see this little guy who's maybe having some difficulties, and when the adults caringly say, come, we're going to take you to the nurturing support center, when everyone feels that they're being taken care of, then the brain opens up. And then whatever curriculum you want to teach enters much more easily into the child's brain. When they just feel safe and secure and know that no matter what happens, the adults will be there to take care of them. But that requires a variety of options. It can't be one program fits all.
Right. It seems, based on what you guys are mentioning a lot too, is those relationship building. The relationships are key, and feeling safe in those relationships, be it at school or at home or wherever it might be, that you have this sense of safety, and that frees you, that frees your mind.
Exactly. For sure, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, having a whole child approach, and that we're keeping in mind the sensitivity of the child or some of the challenges that they may have, and welcome those to support them through that, rather than trying to make them something that they can't just yet be, whether it's immaturity or whether it's defenses that have played because of life experiences or traumas or whatnot, that we're able to work with whomever is there at the place where they're at.
Yeah. And ultimately never setting things up so that children feel they have to earn the right to being cared for by the adults. And so at our Center of Excellence, we are not very supportive at all of any kind of reward systems or reinforcement systems, because that basically says to the children, in order to merit us taking care of you, you have to be good. And that's just not the message we want to give to students. We want to say to them, we're going to work with them. And we've been successful. I mean, we've had one of our other colleagues, Martine Demers, works hands-on in the schools. Catherine has as well, myself a little bit less so, but yes, even so. And with this approach that we're talking about, respecting the development, having the patience, working the attachments, giving the space for play. We've had wonderful, even some of our most challenging students have grown and developed, and it is something that stays within them. And that's the beauty of it, is when you respect children's development and create the conditions, the fruit that you see is a lovely, luscious fruit. And again, I think of the tomato that's grown on the vine, how lovely it is, but you need to have the patience and the faith that this is what creates that kind of fruit.
Well said. So, Eva, you're close to your tipping of the hat and wishing Catherine a great career or a continued career. What are your biggest takeaways, Eva, from this journey that you've been on for, your career? Can you boil it all down to a couple of key takeaways that you're leaving Catherine with to carry on the journey?
Well, Catherine has clearly, as you know, can have heard that she embraces the similar approach that I do. And so I think probably one of the most important things to remember, especially because we're dealing with some of the most challenging students and as a result, adults who are in distress, constantly to spend a little bit of time just walking through a school and peeking into the classrooms where you haven't been called to intervene and watching the amazing things that adults do for our students. Most of the work that I've done, I've been confident that it is the right way to go because I've been inspired by the teachers, the staff, the principals, the technicians, the attendants, the secretaries, the caretakers, and everyone who interacts with children. I've been inspired by the people who basically see each child for who they are, try to give them the support that they need and the guidance that they need. And I've seen the results, and so I have to constantly remind myself to go back and, a little bit like Fred Rogers says to us, look for the helpers, look for the people. And our teachers devote themselves, our educators are amazing, amazing people. And particularly in this time, my hat goes off to them. My role has always been, I want to support you so that you can keep doing what needs to be done for the children that are in your care.
Right. Well said. Very inspiring for sure. So next year, Eva, when everybody's heading back to school, where will you be heading?
Well, I will be taking a little bit of time off, but I will continue to work in the private sector for the schools that are not in the English school boards of Quebec, and helping them to look at this kind of an approach because it's needed everywhere across Canada. So I will be doing some private work in this area. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both, Eva and Catherine, for your time today. We could talk all day about this. It's just so fascinating. But I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise and experiences with this community that we have here on the podcast. And I want to wish you both a great summer. I hope you get some much-deserved rest. Yes.
Yeah, same to you. We really do appreciate that you thought of us to have us join you on this. It's well needed to continue sharing the message.
Absolutely. And I think our community is strong. And Eva, I'm going to just echo that I do think our system is an amazing system, and we have some absolutely amazing people within that care so much for the children that are under our care.
Our English school boards here in Quebec and even across starting to be known as places because they have embraced this approach, despite the fact that it's not an easy one to do. And people are looking to our school boards to see how this goes into action. So I'm just so proud to have worked with such a wonderful, wonderful system, group of people who are, I tell you, our English school boards are incredibly special places, not only, as I say, here in Quebec, but across Canada. And I'm eternally grateful for having been given this wonderful, wonderful opportunity. And I know I'm leaving it in good hands with Catherine, and I look forward to seeing all of the wonderful fruits of implementing an approach that respects children's development. And thank you to you as well, Chris, for
it's my pleasure.
Continuing this on and making this available. I think the pandemic has taught us how much we can use these kinds of mediums for communicating with everyone across the province, from Les Îles de la Madeleine up to Temiskaming and all the way down to Sutton and all across our wonderful province.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And that's kind of the crux of this, is to spread our expertise a little bit, but also our relationships with others, and that you kind of don't feel like you're so alone, even though we're looking at each other through screens most of the time. Well, I am anyway. But it's been a tough few years. So and your work is all like just contributed to this, and I think it's become even more important in these last few years as well. So change is afoot. I really believe that, and our educators are on a really cool journey right now, and I think they're going in a great direction. So it's wonderful to hear your feedback and your perspective on things. So again, thank you very much to you both, and I wish you a really great summer, and we'll have a chat again.
Great.
Absolutely.
And just one last little thing,
Mm-hmm.
CEBM.ca for if you want to just look at a lot of the things that we've developed. CEBM.ca. And,
excellent. I'll put the link in the descriptor of the podcast too, so people have
Wonderful.
access to it.
Thank you. Good.
Thank
Well,
you.
have a lovely summer too, Chris.
Mm-hmm.